Okay, we'll call to order tonight's meeting, Tuesday, May 1st meeting, business meeting of the Littleton City Council. Clerk, please call the roll.
Oh, I must have a short. Sorry. Mayor Brinkman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Valdez?
Present.
Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll?
Here.
Councilmember Elrod?
Here.
Councilmember Fay?
Here.
Councilmember Schlachter? We
Here.
have a quorum.
Thank you. Looks like we have a scout troop in the audience. What number are you?
We're 597.
597. Would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
Okay. Council, are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as published. Next item is public comment. If you wish to address the City Council under public comment, please have signed in on the public speaker form. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. The City Council is not authorized by the Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at any issue or at the issues at this meeting. The mayor may refer the matter to staff to obtain additional information and report back to council as appropriate. We also have a couple public hearings this evening, so if you're here to speak on the public hearing, we ask that you hold your comments until that time so that it'll be noted for the record. Gloria Schoen.
Ooh. Going golfing.
Do we feel and pass around?
Our turf is pretty nice. Yeah.
Looks like grass. Artificial turf, all right.
There you go. Yeah.
Good evening, Council. I'm Gloria Schoen, and I live in Southbridge, too. And today was actually a very bad day for me. I had gone to the home show, and there, I didn't know why I went except a free ticket, but I saw this turf, which I thought was the answer to a perennial problem I've had in my backyard trying to keep things alive in the southwest exposure, and I've got between 2/3 and half an acre. So this looked really good. So I picked up cards. There were lots of vendors and took bids. I was getting ready to finalize those bids when today I called the city to make sure that the front yard, I decided to include that as just a tiny little thing, would be okay because sometimes there's prohibitions against things in front yards. So I found out that not one blade of that is legal in Littleton, nowhere. My backyard, nowhere. And, you know, there's lots of, with the water situation, with the fertilizers you put on them, with all of the emissions from the mowing of them and spraying weeds on them, you don't do any of that to this. You put it down and you're done. And I've since been in 6 yards in Littleton that have it. I'm not going to rat them out. There's some mostly in the backyard. There's some that are not. And most have been down 6 to 12 years. And they look just like they did the day they were put down. And mine is actually nicer because, you know, it's an evolving technology. This is not AstroTurf. So I got a call back from Pam Hall and Carol Kuhn, who told me that 10-5-7B says use of non-living materials. No artificial trees, shrubs, turf, or plants may be used. And so I just talked to Mark Ralph, to see if that was if he thought that was true, and we're still talking because there's something else to do with if you have a landscape plan, and we got caught by the meeting starting, so we didn't get this all happened today, and like I say, it's been a really bad day. So I don't know what my yard solution's going to be. I don't know how fast the ordinances can come up with evolving technology and the new realities of water usage and all of that. I don't even know if you like this stuff. I love it. But I thank you. This is something you might not have been aware of until someone brought it to you. Of my 2 top finalists, 3 Littleton installations are going in this week, City of Littleton, but not mine because I was silly enough to call and they've got my name. Thanks.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you.
Pat Durbin.
Night goes better.
Thank you, Gloria.
Yeah, I live in back of Littleton High School, and myself and my neighbors are having an issue with the starter pistol at the track meets. And they use actual .22 caliber blanks in that, and it drives all the animals crazy. And a couple months ago, there was a shooting about a block from my house, and I didn't even think anything of it because I thought it was people over at the track starting a track meet. So I've tried to broach this with Littleton and have a deaf ear. They said they'd get back with me and they never return my calls. So if there's anything that could be done to look into this, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Brad Camp.
Yes, I live at 8105 South Logan Drive. Just want to address briefly your First Amendment item. Here, the Safeway Oakbrook Shopping Center, owned by AutoNation Ford, they're proposing to have overnight parking of their inventory. We've met both neighborhood meetings, so there's like 4 houses that back right up to this property. I'm one of them. And we met with them, and pretty much they have done everything we requested that we do. So overall, I don't have a problem with it. I think in the long run, it would be safer. A lot of things go on back in this lot. So there's 12 items that were put in the suggested amendment by the Planning Commission, and I just wanted to support those items. And the main reason is because I've lived there since 2002. And every year, Courtesy Ford or the current owner, AutoNation, has violated the existing PD by parking new cars, inventory cars in that lot. Sometimes up to a month to 6 weeks at a time until we call them, and then they'll move them. But eventually they come back. Now, AutoNation is much better at it than Courtesy Ford was, but the fact that they violate the existing PD, I don't have much faith that just because they say they're going to do the things that we requested, that they are actually going to do them unless it's in the PD, and that the residential neighborhood has some sort of recourse to hold them to what we're hoping that they will do with that lot. One other thing that one of the Planning Commission mentioned was putting more landscaping, and that is one of the items. I would like to suggest that the landscaping mainly be put on Phillips Avenue because the fence is a wrought iron see-through fence. So when you drive down Phillips, you will be able to see all those inventory cars parked there, but some low-lying landscape would pretty much block a majority of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Peter? I'm hesitant to try the last name.
Hello, my name is Peter Van Leeuwen. I'm a student at Littleton High School, and I live on 5556 South Washington Street. As part of my civics class, I've been asked to attend some city council meetings, and as a high school student, I didn't think I would ever enjoy having to participate in my local legislature. However, this is my 3rd meeting, and I truly think that this has been a very educational experience that I've ended up weirdly enjoying. And I just wanted to thank the council members and the city staff for allowing me to, I guess, to learn and experience local legislature in a beneficial way. So thank you.
Can you spell your last name for me?
VANLEEUWEN.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Brejak?
I'm Carol Brezak. I live in the 4th District. Wendy, can we put this up? Okay. At your last study session, there was quite a discussion about first readings that was reminiscent of that story, Who's on First? The city attorney told council that the first reading was not a time to discuss the merits of the proposed ordinance. The Littleton Charter states, after the introduction of the ordinance, the same shall be approved or rejected by the council. It does not say that there can't be any discussion or amending of said ordinance on first reading. It just says the ordinance has to be rejected or approved. I do not believe you are limited in amending an ordinance on first and or second reading, and recommend that you take advantage of every opportunity you have to make your legislation better. To make substantive changes at second reading requires you to be really good at what you're doing. It's not easy to be thorough, complete, and succinct in making amendments to ordinances on the fly. Even when you come prepared, the results can be less than expected. Example, last week, amendments were made to the fire inclusion agreement. This was the third time the draft agreement was in front of council, and here's how the final version reads. In the event of termination without inclusion of the city into South Metro, the parties agree to cooperate in good faith to provide such transfer and distribution of assets as set forth herein so as to allow each party to individually resume responsibility for providing fire services within their jurisdictions. One sentence later, it says, if the inclusion has not been successful and the city terminates the agreement, the city fire department assets shall remain the property of the fire authority. In paragraph 2F, it says, if inclusion has not been successful and the city terminates the agreement, the lease shall terminate and only stations 12 and 19 shall be returned to the city and the fire department capital asset shall be conveyed to the South Metro District or the fire authority. I don't think that's what the intent was of the motion that was made by Ms. Elrod. But my question is, and I really do want an answer, is what actually happens to the fire assets if the city terminates the agreement if inclusion is not successful? If I had my magic wand, I'd have council discuss any ordinance on first reading that they were inclined to discuss. It would provide the citizens with more understanding of your intentions. It would provide for amendments to be published before the second reading. If that had been done with the fire agreement, perhaps the contradictions would have been noticed prior to the final approval. Thank you.
Pam Chadbourne?
Leave it up. Sure. Thanks. I don't know what this exactly is, but there it is. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here in District 1. And I agree with what Carol Brezak just said. And in addition, I'm going to address something on your agenda. It says, the City Council is not authorized by the Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at the meeting on any issue raised by public comment. I believe that this is wrong. And I've never gotten, or, in the past couple of years, I have not gotten a response. In this case, I want a response from City Council to this, and I would like it in public because this is vital to public interests. And what I think is wrong there is on any issue, and that's because, as you can see, we have a published agenda. And the whole reason to publish the agenda is so that people who are concerned with those items can show up at the meeting. So if I have a comment about minutes to be approved, or if I have a comment about consent agenda items, not only do I expect you to pay attention to what I say, but I expect you to discuss it. And I think that's legal. And I would like a legal reading of this comment that I'm making now. I want this changed. I think it's legal to change it. I think you must change it in order to respond to the public. Otherwise, I want you to talk about why you're not doing it. So that's the thing I wanted to talk about. This is very vital to your response to public and the fact that we have a public agenda that is supposed to bring all of us together to talk about this at the time, and that you're supposed to respond to what we say. Thank you very much, Council.
Thank you, Pam. That takes us to the consent agenda. Our first item on consent agenda is Ordinance 21. This is an ordinance on first reading to amend the Safeway Oakbrook Shopping Center General Planned Development Plan for Lot 7. Item letter B is Ordinance 20. This is an ordinance on first reading to amend Title 10, Chapter 9, Plan Development Overlay, and Chapter 2, Zone Districts. Item C is ID 18147, which is approval of the April 17, 2018 regular minutes. And I need a motion.
I move to approve consent agenda items A, B, and C.
And it's been motioned and seconded by Councilmember Cole.
Thank you.
Ready to vote?
Yep.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we have no items under general business, so that will take us to our ordinances on second reading and public hearing. The first is Ordinance 17. This is an ordinance on second reading repealing Sections 3-3-1 to 3-3-7 pertaining to circuses and carnivals, and adding new Chapter 3 pertaining to establishing the standards for the issuance of a permit for special events and demonstrations in the city. And we have a staff presentation by City Attorney Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This ordinance is designed to provide for regulation of special events within the city. Last year, the city had approximately 150 special events between public property and private property. And currently, right now, the city doesn't have a formal process for the permitting and regulation of these events. We have an informal process, and the problems that presents is sometimes we don't get adequate notice. Sometimes we're not able to plan. We get into issues such as street closures and public notification. We also get into issues such as making sure that if there is a special event that's on public property, that the public isn't bearing the burdens of cleaning up the property. Because many of these events, they are designed to make money, and under the current informal process, the city has all of those issues. Plus, we also have some constitutional issues because this is protected First Amendment speech, and because we don't have specific rules, we're at risk for possible lawsuits because we are interfering with First Amendment speech. We also are at risk for liability because we don't have rules. So as a result, working with the Office of Communications and all of the staff, we had put together a special events ordinance, which has been to you in study sessions. After the first read, I did have an opportunity to meet with Councilmember Cole and make some modifications to improve the syntax. I also had an opportunity to discuss the matter with Councilmember Fay, and on the definitions of demonstration and special events, we removed the double negatives and we added significantly more breakdown in terms of subparts to make it much more understandable. Now, I also did have a couple of questions from Mayor Pro Tem Valdez, and I wanted to walk through those real quick. What happens if one or more property owners disapproves the special event closure of a street? What happens is the special event promoter must notify all of the property owners on a street that's proposed to be closed. If they fail to do so, they will not receive their permit. If they do, and there's objections, the city would then make a decision whether to grant the closure of the street, or we may decide that we will only grant a partial closure of the street, or we may decide that we won't grant the closure of the street at all. And without getting into great details on how Public Works would do that, they would look at things such as traffic, the ability to monitor and maintain detours. Is it going to affect adjacent businesses? Is it going to create disruption? Time frames. If you're doing it during 5 o'clock rush hour and you're proposing to close Main Street, probably not a really good thing on a weekday. And so all of those are the types of things that the Public Works Department would look at. The question was also raised about a resident block party having more than 100 people. Where would they display their permit? They just have to have it present with them so that it'd be available for inspection. And finally, and the other question was pertaining to the sign code, and I'll address that with the sign code when that presentation comes up. What this ordinance is designed to do is to require for both private and public special events that they will go through an application and permit process. Now, there's certain types of protected speech that we do not require a permit. The Constitution does not let us. Churches can have a demonstration at church, and there's no requirement of a permit. Our concern is when things flow out into our streets, because now the city has a legal responsibility to maintain its streets reasonably safe for the users. So when things flow out into our streets, now we're concerned. And the whole purpose of this is to address those concerns. There's review by all of the impacting departments, which includes not just communications, but community development, because they may have to issue a temporary use permit. Fire, police, public works, all are involved. Now, the question may come up with the recent agreement passed for inclusion in South Metro. If this is adopted, once South Metro is providing fire service to the city, they have a fire inspection division of South Metro, and we would simply work with them, and they would review this event from that standpoint. And we've already been in communication with them on fire inspection issues. So they are aware that this is a responsibility that they will be having. This also allows the city, more importantly, to make sure that the participants who come to these events are safe. The fact is the Director of Communications can tell you, Littleton is a happening place. We get some very big special events at Breckenridge Brewery, Hudson Gardens, and they involve literally thousands of people. And there are issues that we just have to be able to address. People crossing Santa Fe Drive in the wrong place, not a good thing. Having two special events that are large special events going on the same weekend. The fact of the matter is, we want to protect public safety, but we have limits on our resources. And we need to be able to work with promoters to say, listen, 2 large events on one Saturday is really beyond the city's ability to maintain the public safety in an effective manner. We also need to be able to assure that citizens and taxpayers aren't stuck with the cost of cleanup. You want to use our streets, you want to use our parks, you want to use our property, that can be a good thing. But you need to pay a deposit, and you need to make sure the city isn't stuck with the bill, because it's not fair to the citizens and the residents of the city that you put on a special event, you make the money, but then you shift the cost of that event to the citizens. This ordinance gives all of those things to the staff that I believe from the legal standpoint that the city will be able to ensure public health, safety, and have great special events where the participants are safe, the public's needs are met, the residents' needs are met by us properly regulating, and we are protecting and recognizing First Amendment rights and speech. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions?
I have some questions. Should I ask them now, or should we go through public comment then come back?
No, you can ask him now.
Okay. So Steve, reading through this, it's very robust. And I have a couple of items that I just want to get a little bit more understanding on. So the first one is section 3-3-6, and these are grounds for denial. Number 12, where it says an event scheduled on the same date as an event for the past 5 years. So that almost is first come, first serve. So if someone's already in the gate, they've been doing the same event for 5 years. For someone else to come in and try to bring another event, essentially they're limited. Why was this particular item put in? And maybe what I would prefer to see or a recommendation would be there may be a hierarchy. So city-sponsored events will, get first preference. And I don't know what the rest would be, but can you give me some background there?
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, this, working with the Director of Communications, this was put in because we had a conflict with our informal system a year ago. We had a really large event scheduled. It had been going on for several years. We had a second large event scheduled for the same weekend, and we had other weekends available, but that event at the time was not prepared to move their weekend, and the city did say, okay, this event has been here for 5 years. They are already scheduled for this weekend. We asked the other event to move, it wouldn't, and the purpose of this would be to give the city the ability to say, you're going to have to move. Now, I would tell you that I think we would prefer to negotiate this with the promoters and not have to say, you shall move. But in this particular case, quite candidly, we had some very serious situations. We did not have enough traffic control on Santa Fe Drive. We were extremely strapped in terms of being able to provide law enforcement services because the two events were so large, and it could have very easily become a substantial problem. We were very lucky it didn't, and that's the reason for this.
Is there anything in here that would allow us to, so it could very easily happen that these events are planned and they've taken up every single weekend over the summer and there's no opportunity for a new event to come into the city. So is there any provision that either states that after so many years the schedule will be revisited and other opportunities would be made available? It just really shuts the organizations out.
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, essentially there is, because there's no guarantee each year that you're going to get a permit. So if, for example, we have event A and it's had a permit for 5 years, and for whatever reason we're finding that particular weekend is a problem, when year 6 comes up, we certainly are going to say to that event, listen, let's talk about the dates. So the fact that you've had it doesn't guarantee each year you're automatically going to get a permit. Each year you're going to have to go through the same application process, and you're going to have to make the same justifications. And one of the things here may be that we may well say, we need to talk about a different weekend.
Okay. Second item was 3-3-8, appeal procedures.
Yes.
So that one just seemed like a really short time frame to impose a denial, and I didn't catch whether there was a time frame that you have to submit for an application for an event, 30 days or 60 days or some period of time prior to the event actually happening, or could it be as quickly as 1 week before? And my concern here is, the reason I'm asking, because when an organization is sponsoring an event, they're putting marketing dollars or incurring expenses. If we were to deny, is there any liability or risk that we assume because we've denied it, and now they've spent $100,000 promoting the event.
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, this question I'll answer in two parts. First, the reason for the short time frame is because many times special events involve First Amendment speech. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case that says we have to grant prompt judicial review. So the reason for the short time frame is to meet the mandates of that U.S. Supreme Court case. Secondly, in terms of liability, no, you don't have a constitutional right to get a permit for a special event. You have a constitutional right to have what we call procedural due process and have the city follow its rules. And if the city doesn't follow its rules, yes, we can have liability. But if the city follows its rules, you don't have a constitutional right to get the permit.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Councilmember
So
Valdez.
in regards to advertising for these events, a year or two ago, we had the banner that we put across Main Street for advertising an event that had been there for many years, and a second event that was advertised during that same period. So what do we have addressing that banner that we advertise or announce?
That banner would get addressed in the next ordinance, which is going to be the sign code. The special event, its signage would be subject to the sign code, not the special events code. So we will address banners in the sign code, and one of the issues that will, and we do allow banners like across Main Street. They are permitted under the sign code, but the special events code won't address that.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a follow-up question to Councilmember Elrod's question about application. I'm not finding it in here, I may just be missing it, a time frame for an application to be submitted prior to the event, a certain number of days?
Yes.
Can you just refresh my memory on what that was? Was it 30 days or?
10 days on that.
Yes, for block parties, it's 20 days.
Block parties is 20
and
days.
And for any event that involves the sale of alcohol, it's 45 days. And for other events, it's 30 days. And the reason is, many times the alcohol events involve a liquor license. So we need to have the extra time to deal with the liquor license requirements.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Steve.
If it's all right, Mayor, I'm going to stay up here because the next one is mine too.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to public comment.
Okay,
We're going to go to.
Get out of there.
So this is a public hearing. So we will open the public hearing at 7:02, and I do have some people signed up. Okay, first one is Tom Witham.
Mayor, Council, thank you. My name is Tom Witham. I'm co-owner of Lido Wine Merchants on Main Street. We've been there almost 12 years now, and we've been very fortunate, and our business has grown, and we love the community we're in. What we do want to address is that we are completely against street closures as they affect small businesses. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our business model and how we operate and what goes on with us. We have a beautiful storefront on Main Street. People come in, they find us, it's wonderful. The bulk of our business comes in our back door because we have made it convenient for our customers. They know they can come in the back, they know they can park there, and we can load cases of wine in their car. Our main clientele who come into our store live in Beaumar, they live in Columbine, the Hamlet, Grant Ranch, Brookhaven, Polo Reserve. Most of our people come in across Santa Fe. They come into Alamo and turn up Nevada and come in our parking lot in the back. It's their traffic pattern, that's the way they shop. And we're glad they do. We tried to make it convenient so that they would come to us. And we don't want to see a street closure on Main if possible. We have enough. And we certainly don't want a street closure on Nevada because that's the normal access to our parking lot for our customers. Another concern, and I believe I read the ordinance, I believe it was addressed a little bit, but parking concerns are always big in the city. And right now on Nevada, we have major construction going on that at this time is the Nevada Place Construction's eliminating 15 parking spots. Right in front of the fourplexes that are being built, they've eliminated 3 more. If we close Nevada Street for any time, we're going to lose another 27 parking spots. And I'm concerned with the people who work at the tavern, the people who work at Smoke and Fins. Their wait staff park on the streets. Where are they going to park? If there's a special event going on that's closing the street, where are the vendors going to park? So I'm really, really concerned about the parking there. And I do have a few other points, but my 3 minutes are up. So I do thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Tom. Next is Tina Witham.
Good evening. I'm Tom Witham, Part 2. I'm the other co-owner of Lido. Littleton is a wonderful place. There's a lot more to Littleton than downtown, but downtown is the crown jewel. Brick and mortar is the lifeblood of downtown, and Saturday's business is the mother's milk of small business. When you choke off Saturday small business, you choke off our livelihood. There are 2 things that hurt small business. One of them is snow, and the other one is street closures. Since you lack the omnipotence to do anything about snow, we're just asking about street closures instead. So we've been here 12 years. A lot of changes happened. There's a lot of construction going on. Just to give you an idea of what closing Saturday does for us, I'm going to show you some numbers, and I normally don't do this, but I'm going to do it today. A good Saturday for us is over $2,000. A great Saturday is between $3,000 and $5,000. And by the way, all that money is taxed for the city. This is what happened on the Western Welcome Week street closures. So, or Western Welcome Week. In 11, we did less than 1,000. In 12, we did less than 500. We decided in 13 and 14 to close entirely. We opened in 15 and 16 because we sponsored the Western Welcome Week wine tasting here at the city. And those are the numbers that we did. And then last year, we decided to close again. So we're not asking that the city eliminate street closures entirely, but given the nature of Saturday and what it means for small business, we're asking that maybe you reconsider it and perhaps we could move to Sundays. So what I've got here is I've got a list of businesses in downtown Littleton, and there are 80, and I've only got 30 here. And if you look at it, you can see the first column are the hours they're open on Saturday. The second is the hours they're open on Sunday. And the third column is the difference. And they're all negative. Nobody has opened more hours on Sunday than they are on Saturday. But look at all these people. These are all tax collectors that do business in the city of Littleton. And they all understand that Saturday is better than, that Saturday is far better than Sunday. Is there anybody else under here? Oh, look at that. Even Rinke Brothers, who generates many of the street closers, understand that Saturday is a far better day for business than Sunday because they're closed 3 hours. So just these 30 businesses alone represent 118 hours of time that businesses are not open on Sunday versus they are on Saturday. And since there's 80 businesses in downtown Littleton and not 30, this number is actually a much higher number. That is just to illustrate the importance of small business being open on Saturday. So I'm asking, I love this ordinance, and I love the fact that there's a process, but I'm asking that maybe we expand this process a little bit. And as far as downtown Littleton is concerned, Alamo, Maine, Prince, Curtis, Nevada, we consider Sunday only.
Thank you, Tina.
Boy, 3 minutes goes fast.
Next is Pam Chadbourne.
I'm still Pam Chadbourne, and I still live a block and a half from here. So my comments actually, I'm gratified that council members Elrod and Schlachter already brought up a couple of these points. And let me just open with the comment that this is not a process, this is an ordinance, and to me this is a deficiency that has occurred in pretty much a lot of council actions, planning commission actions, historic preservation board actions for years, and I've been going to the meetings for years, so this is my opinion now from observation. And that is that we bring ordinances with language, but it is not accompanied with an illustration of the impact on us. So what there could have been along with this is a timeline, and I'm going to point out that that answer of, 15 days, 30, 45 days for alcohol and 30 days everything else is incomplete, because then the city has time to respond. If I do this right, for typical events, it's really 52 calendar days, 40 some, actually it might be longer than that, because the requirements for the city to respond and the applicant days are all in business days. So you have to add the weekends. It's almost, it's more than 4 months from the time you submit your application until the time, worst case, that you get a response. So to me, one of the fixes for this should be that the city will strive to respond quicker. Another possible fix is to divide applications into type. And okay, if it's a big event, do the whole response. But a lot of events are going to be small, and I think we have a right to expect that those should be processed quicker. I also think that a fix is break the First Amendment stuff out and handle it very, very fast. And have an appeals process for it, because it is different than all the other events. It is not the same. So what should have come with this is the timeline. Staff should have provided a timeline for the application, how long the city has for the different types of events, so we could all see what that is involving and what the impact is. And then if it's denied, how much time there is for the applicant to try to recover, so that they can plan what that is for maybe a large event, and then for small events. As a downtown resident, I think there should be notification for fireworks. In California, they do filming and they require that you notify residents for any kind of explosions. There should be that. So those are my main points. Again, thanks for bringing up some of them. I think this needs more work and more elucidation by staff. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pam. We have no one else signed up. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this issue? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing at 7:12. Council, are there any additional questions for the city attorney?
No, you go first this time, Peggy.
Councilmember Cole.
Well, I would like us to take this back to a study session and fuss at each other a bit more about it.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the city attorney? Councilmember Elrod.
The other item, if you can help me understand how this might be addressed. I don't know that it's here in the ordinance or if it's something that's procedural that sits outside of the ordinance. But when we talk about having 150 events last year or this year or whatever is planned, when is it too much? Like, when is 200 too much? Or how do we determine, 3 events downtown during the summer season should be the max, again, to balance? And I expect it would be different in downtown versus Aspen Grove versus other areas. So how do we manage what is the right amount to ensure that at the end of the day, businesses can still do business and citizens can enjoy their neighborhood and not always have a party in the front yard, although.
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, I'm going to address this, and I'm sure the city manager may want to jump in as well. I think the issue, when does it become too much? That's one of the reasons for this process, so that we can analyze these events. If we have 20 major events in a year, that may be beyond the capability of a city of Littleton's size to address, not because we don't like special events, but just because we have a certain amount of resources, and those same resources we use for special events have to be used to service our citizens day in and day out. And so the whole reason for this permitting process is to give staff that ability where we may run into the situation where we simply say, we don't have the resources. We're not able to manage an event of this size or an event of this complexity, and staff will do that based upon all the evidence in front of them.
Mayor, if I may, maybe just adding to that, I certainly would echo our city attorney's comments on that. It is true. That's why staff is proposing this to council, is that we are beginning to be concerned about the number, the frequency of these events. And so these regulations is a way for us to kind of help manage that. I would also add that we touched on this perhaps a little bit in the study sessions, that in the budget process, there's going to be a discussion about the sponsored events by the city and how far we want to take that. There's kind of a financial piece to that, but there's also kind of a frequency and how that's scattered out across a calendar year. At this point in time, I think the staff is looking for ways to kind of measure what might be too much. I don't think we're here quite yet, but I think we need a system in place to kind of help manage that.
And do you feel that the section grounds for denial gives us enough leeway? Because again, some of these are very specific of what are the bases for denial. Does it give us enough leeway to just say, I think we've had too much?
Yes, Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, I do think both the grounds for denial as well as the regulatory features of this proposed ordinance give us that authority. When we drafted this, we looked at a number of cities that were running into this very type of thing. Greeley, Boulder, for example, both were running into significant issues on the numbers of events. And so my recommendation to you is, I think this does give us the tools that we need. If we continue to see this growth in special events, it would not surprise me that I'm back here with some amendments maybe in a year or two, just because I'm not sure that 4 years ago or 3 years ago, people would have ever thought Littleton would have the level of events it does now. And so this, I think, gives us the tools for today. But certainly, if in the future we need to adjust these tools, we will be back to you with that request.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, council, let's get a motion on the floor, and then we can have discussion.
I move to approve the ordinance repealing the existing section 3-3-1 to 3-3-7 pertaining to circuses and carnivals, and adding new chapter 3 pertaining to establishing the standards for the issuance of a permit for special events and demonstrations in the city.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Councilmember Elrod. Discussion. Peggy, did you want to start?
Yeah, I think there's some really important points that speakers raised here. We have a gem downtown, which is also a challenge. It's like owning a really, like the Hope Diamond or something like that. And where do you store it, and who do you show it to, and how often, and whatever. And we need revenue. If we are harming those businesses, we're harming the city too, even if we're benefiting the city in some other ways. So, you ready for a motion?
We have a motion on the floor.
Well,
I think we should have more discussion first. Can we do that? And then
well, I would like us indeed to consider taking this back to study session so we can vet it more. See if there's some other kind of solution.
do you want to make that motion at this time?
To
You
amend,
can.
How would I amend that one? That changes the motion essentially, right?
Then we would approve or not approve the motion as amended if your amendment passes.
It either adds or takes away.
So you can make your amendment, and we'll vote.
I'm still struggling with how to phrase the amendment that essentially isn't changing.
It would just be an amendment to move the decision, or move it to a study session. It would be similar to what we had to do with the.
So moved. I can
it
so
would
move
be-
what you just said.
It's similar to what we did with the wildlife, because we do have a public hearing going on.
Basically be a third reading, but we wouldn't open the public hearing again because you've already closed it. So if we
Okay.
went back to study session, then we come back and then you guys would do your final vote.
We can move it to a certain date and then with study session in between.
Yes. So the certain day would be the next available study session. Okay, clerk, are you okay with that amendment?
I'm a second on that.
Okay, we have a second
want to
from.
second it.
We have a second from Jerry. Council, do you want to discuss, or are you ready to vote on the amendment?
I'd like to have a
Councilmember
discussion
Elrod.
on it. So in fact, for those reasons, Peggy, and what we've heard from the citizens today, this actually, up until now, this has been an informal process. So we don't know who's being notified, if they're being notified. There's no path to how to be engaged in if an event is coming into the area of whether or not it should happen or how it impacts somebody's business or other. So I actually think this is a really good first step to solve for that. It may not be perfect yet, but what this does do is, one, it provides for notification. It gives the staff legitimate reasons to actually deny events in a method with some method behind it. So I actually think we are in a better position now with this than in the absence of anything. So as we've heard from staff, in part, this is a way for us to be able to gather the data necessary to potentially make more amendments or be able to really understand what the positive impacts of events are or negative impacts of events. So at this time, I think we're actually in a much better position being able to move this forward than to not. And I think it will do more good at this point than harm.
I vehemently agree with Councilmember Elrod. I think that's a very good point.
And on top of that, we hired a special events coordinator, Kelly did, that is specifically brought on to handle these, to get control of this situation. So again, I second what Councilman Elrod had said.
Other comments?
Yeah. No. So, did you call me? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, thank you, Tina, for bringing this up, and your email that you sent a couple days ago was good. And we have had other entrepreneurs have come forward over the past years with similar concerns. And it isn't just all, I think, all about Hoodlum. Hoodlum is a larger organization, but it's not the only organization down there. I think it does warrant having a little bit more discussion on this before we get into the meat of the summer schedule, because that's really when things are going to happen. I think we can do this in another, 2 weeks if we had it. Is there time to put this on the next study session?
Yes.
If there's time to put it on the next study session, I think it is worth the discussion. And then we would have it in 2 weeks. It would come back for the final reading at that point. So I would like to see this, a little bit more discussion on this, because to give it a little bit more thought. And also for the new council members, go back and look and see some of the issues that we've had in the past with some of the other folks and who are no longer down along Main Street and off to the side streets is really where it gets affected to a lot of these folks.
So I have a question. So do we not now, for this year, have most of the requests, maybe all the requests in that would be affected by this? I mean, are we?
We don't know. We don't have a process.
I know for sure of one that in August that is not in. and possibly one in September that it isn't in. So they don't necessarily have them in now.
Good evening, Council. I'm going to guess it's 50-50 probably at this point. I think we've issued permits for over 120 events for this year, but we do know, I don't have anything yet from Western Welcome Week, so that's just a good example. We don't have any of that in yet. We don't even have the Hudson Gardens concerts in yet, so.
But yet we know they're going to happen.
We know they're going to happen. We just haven't got the permits in.
So you have 120 of the 150 that we're aware of.
Yeah, things like Aspen Grove Farmers Markets, the Paris Street Market at Aspen Grove. Aspen Grove's doing a film series. We have a bunch from Aspen Grove, in fact.
But for our attorney, so those that have already submitted their application, do they fall under a new ordinance?
Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, those who have already submitted an application will be through the informal process. Those who submit an application after the effective date of this ordinance, should it pass, would be subject to the provisions of this ordinance.
So one of the things that I would like us to consider is, possibly, is certain areas of the city would be affected, limited, restricted, and certain ones would not. I mean, because part of what you're just saying is, well, we got other things popping up here and there, but everybody who spoke tonight is pretty much from one area. Is that right? So this may be something that we need to think about, sectors of the city being impacted differently.
I don't see any specific deficiencies in this ordinance that would unduly harm businesses or make it a reason to discuss more. That, I mean, I suppose one of the public comments was having a timeline. I don't think a timeline, I mean, the days to submit are set in the ordinance. I think an actual timeline that's consumer-friendly could be done on a website. I don't think it needs to be in an ordinance. Are there specific issues that could maybe be addressed in just a detailed amendment to the ordinance to alter, say, hey, we want X, Y, Z in here?
Steve, this is not necessarily about closing down Main Street. I mean, this is about closing down Main Street to some of our merchants. But this still comes in front of the staff to apply for that permit and decide whether or not we're going to close that down. We're just getting some verbiage around how the city's going to operate on special events.
Councilmember Driscoll, that's correct. This is just giving us the tools to regulate.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Fay.
I wonder if we could get some data about the amount of revenue that's lost for those number of hours that the city is shut down on Saturdays versus having a not shut down on Saturdays and on Sunday, as the alternatives that were presented to us by Tina Witham. That fascinates me that we're losing that many hours of tax revenue, but I don't know what that's worth. I think it's worth. Could we ask staff to give us that number? An estimate, not a firm number.
Mayor,
go ahead, City Attorney.
The issue is that because most tax revenue information submitted by taxpayers is confidential under state law, we can certainly work with the finance department to perhaps come up with just a generalized estimate, but it won't identify specific businesses or specific taxpayers because it would be a violation of law to do that.
Generalized would be great.
Other council? No, I'm sorry, Tina. Councilmember Valdez.
I don't feel as though we're rushing this at all. If we already have 125 applicants submitted and we're anticipating another 20 or whatever the number may be, I think we have time, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, to get this a little bit better presented. The other thing too is I don't want to just be representing almost this ordinance, representing one large group down in Main Street when there's certainly many others down there that don't belong to this organization. So I think giving it another couple weeks to discuss some of the issues, give the attorney more time to talk about it, having our community director, communication director to come up with some more thoughts, and just some other ideas. But I don't think it's a matter of we need to rush this through. Again, I've heard over the years so many different things about closing streets and businesses and how it negatively affects them. I'm okay with holding this up for just a couple more weeks at least.
Are there any other, Councilmember Elrod?
Again, I don't, to Jerry's comment of closing streets, this ordinance is not at all about closing streets. It's actually giving staff the tools to say no to events and be able to keep the streets open. In some ways, give them more tools to be able to say, no, it's too much. Let's keep them open. So I just want us to recognize that this ordinance is in no way given greater authority to accept more. It is just giving us regulations to represent our decisions and being able to be more fair and equitable as opposed to the risk of being subjective. So I think, again, this actually puts us in a stronger position to be able to better manage the right level of activity that we want within our city.
Are there any other comments? Councilmember Cole.
Well, if we take a couple of weeks more, hopefully, if there's additional information that people have, the businesses have, that would shed insight onto this, they could. And if they don't have additional, that says something itself. But if we have 2 weeks, let's take 2 weeks and see what, if anything else, we flush out with this. I mean, it does look good, and yet people have concerns. And it's money to us.
Any other comments? I'm not going to support the amendment. I think that the ordinance as written is good. It's not perfect. Perfect's the enemy of good. And I think that while Kelly has indicated that there are 120 that have permits in, there are also events that are pretty much traditional. They're ongoing. I mean, the Hudson Gardens concert series, the things at Aspen Grove, those are not about talking about street closures or any of that. Those are different. I think where the danger zone for us is, and it has been in the past, because we have gotten into some situations with folks that have wanted events because we don't have the guides and the ability to really manage those like we need to and like we should, which does serve the merchants better. And that's the missing pieces in there. Those are the ones that we don't know that are coming. Those are the ones that we don't know when they're going to hit. I know that a couple years ago there was a group of folks that did these pretty substantial craft brew events, and they brought in 30 different tents and all kinds of music and this type of thing, and they showed up 30 days before they wanted to do the event. So those are the things that we need to have this stuff in place, because without it, we are pretty much, kind of, as the city attorney said, asking for some trouble. I also think that with everything that we do, this is new. This is a much better version than what we've had, clearly, which was nothing. And as time goes, we do have the opportunity to amend these. And making an amendment on this does not take a long time. We can bring it back. We can make an amendment. It doesn't require a public hearing for an amendment. And so those things can happen. But those amendments will happen as the need it comes up, as opposed to trying to anticipate everything and actually probably over-managing the situation to the point where we may cause more trouble than we're trying to prevent. So as I said, I will not be supporting this. Council, are we ready for a vote on the amendment to move to a study session?
The vote is 3 in favor with Councilmember Driscoll, Mayor Brinkman, Councilmember Schlachter, and Councilmember Elrod voting no. The motion fails 3-4.
Okay, Council, we're back to the main motion. Is there any additional conversation on the main motion? Okay. The main motion, does anybody need that repeated? We're good? Okay, ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilmember Cole voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
All right, so we are now on to Ordinance 16. This is an ordinance on second reading, deleting Title 4, Section 3 from the building regulations of the municipal code regarding sign code regulation and adding Title 10, Section 17 to the zoning code of the municipal code regarding sign code regulations. This is also a public hearing, and first, City Attorney Kemp will be presenting.
Mayor, members of council, thank you. Just a bit of background for those who were either not at the study session or have not seen the packet. The city sign code currently is in Chapter 4 of the city code, which is the building code. And if you were to actually read the city sign code today, you would think that I would have to get 2 permits, one from the building safety official and one from the planning department. Now, we have kind of fixed that, so to speak, in that we have the planning department do everything. But that's not really what the code says. It is highly unusual for the sign code to be treated as part of the building. The sign code is part of zoning. It's treated as part of a zoning package. Whenever you do planned development districts, it's built within your zoning package. It is a zoning function. And what the first overlying thing that we're proposing to do is take the sign code out of the building code and put it where it belongs, which is in the zoning code. Now, in doing that, we spent, working with the community development department, a lot of time looking at the sign code, because we found that we had first some definitions that really didn't work. We found that we had some provisions that did not work very well, and some even conflicted. And we also found areas based particularly on the council study session that we didn't regulate. But first, I did have some questions from council members that I did want to address as part of this presentation. One is, what about residential neighborhood monument signs? Do they need to have a permit for installing or replacing their sign? If there's a directional sign that is non-illuminated, it has no lights, that doesn't require a permit. Most of the residential neighborhood signs are illuminated. They would require a sign permit because of the lighting. The next question that was asked in regards to the sign code was in regards to, first, the abatement process. Why do certain parts of the abatement process go to the city manager, and why do certain parts go to the Board of Adjustment? The parts that go to the city manager pertain to the fees that are imposed if you have a violation and the city has to remove it. Those, you have an administrative hearing in front of the city manager. If you're contesting the interpretation of the code and whether the sign is legal, that goes to the Board of Adjustment, because that's a quasi-judicial matter, and the Board of Adjustment hears that. And then finally, the question was asked in cases that go to the Board of Adjustment, there was sort of a catch-all provision. This is actually 10-7-11 of the proposed code. And if you were to look at that, it has some very specific provisions. And then there's a provision that says that the application requesting a variance before the board it has sort of a catch-all. And the purpose of that is, we have to remember, unlike normal land use, signs involve commercial speech, and commercial speech has a degree of First Amendment protection. So where, for example, on a land use case in front of the Board of Adjustment, I have to show absolute hardship, I have to show an impact that the ordinance creates that's unique to myself. With a sign, we can't impose that same level of requirements because we run afoul of the First Amendment. So the Board of Adjustment is given a broader set of authority to look at that sign. Now, again, this is a rather long ordinance, and so without going through all of the small changes, there are some major changes that we did address out of the council study session, and I'd like to spend a couple minutes just discussing those. One is, currently under our code, indoor signs that are designed to advertise a business and be seen from the street are exempt from the sign package. I can have a sign inside my business. It can be gargantuan. It can be designed solely to advertise my business to cause traffic to see it. Currently not a sign. This now treats those as signs. And the idea is a sign outside your business that's designed to advertise your business from the street is a sign. Sign inside your business that's designed to advertise your business from the street is a sign. Treat them the same. Secondly, we didn't have any provisions in our current code for addressing menu board signs. And these are really you find at fast food restaurants. One could have them as big as you wanted. And one of the problems with that is that it could become both a safety hazard in terms of visibility at the driveway, as well as if that restaurant's adjacent to a residential area, it can become a lighting issue. So we've now addressed that as well. Finally, another area that our code did not address was murals. Murals can be great pieces of art. You can travel around the world and you'll find them everywhere. And this doesn't propose to regulate murals that are pieces of art. However, some people like to do murals to advertise a product for sale. It's nothing new. You could go back 100 years and look at the history of American advertising and find murals all over the country advertising products for sale. This now does address those as a sign. And the idea is again, if you're going to do a billboard advertising a product for sale, that's a sign. You're doing a mural on the side of a building advertising a product for sale, it's a sign. We treat them the same. We don't look at content, we look at what the purpose of it is. Now finally, the last major area that we addressed in the code is the abatement provisions. Quite candidly, our abatement provisions in the current code are contradictory, they really don't work, and it'd be very difficult to do sign enforcement. We looked at a number of cities. One of the cities that we looked at that had a much more structured, organized process for abatement was Aurora. And so we looked at their provisions and we have redrafted our provisions so that we have a workable abatement process. Because it is necessary, sometimes we do get signs in violation of the code, and we need to be able to address those. And so with that, the basic purposes, should council adopt this, is we will be moving signs into the zoning code. We will be changing, having our processes that we actually do match our code, which they currently don't do, and we will be regulating these additional types of signs. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions that the council may have.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Steve, if somebody isn't compliant with the new sign code, how much time do they have to adopt to the new ordinance?
Councilmember Driscoll, members of the council, any sign that is in violation of the new sign code would be treated as a non-conforming sign. So they would not have to bring it into compliance until they either made improvements to the sign or there's a 7-year period where they would have to bring it, at that point, they would have to bring it into compliance. But just like other non-conforming uses, this code is going to be prospective, not retroactive.
Other questions? Councilmember Elrod?
I have a few. Okay. Enforcement, should I hold and let somebody else go? Okay. So for enforcement, my concern is how are we going to enforce it? So we're putting in regulation, or we're adding some additional regulation, and I want to understand now the enforcement process. So if someone identifies, or if we, maybe not if we, the staff, but if a citizen identifies that a sign is not in conformance or they have a question, are they calling code enforcement? or click and fix? Like, what are some of the avenues that can be communicated?
Councilmember Elrod, I'll start this, and then if the city manager, Joskin, wishes to weigh in. Generally, what will happen, like with any other zoning code enforcement will be the starting place for enforcement. And I've been involved in sign code enforcement throughout my career, and it's been pretty much the same way. Code enforcement starts. Generally, we're compliance focused. We want to work with the property owner to get their sign into compliance with the current code. And so in many cases, that can be done. Now, occasionally, we'll have situations where the sign cannot be brought into compliance. And then we have to deal with, was it a non-conforming sign, or was it a sign? Mostly, these come up where they've been installed without a permit. And again, what we want is, we want them to go through the permitting process so the community development staff can analyze it and look at it, make sure that the sign meets all of our permit requirements. Occasionally, we'll get signs, in my experience, that will have either unshielded illumination where they'll have lights shining up or shining into a neighborhood and those kinds of things. Again, we will address those. The goal is to get compliant, to get the lights properly shielded, to get that sign to comply with our code. Now, ultimately, if it doesn't, and we get a property owner who simply says, I'm not going to comply with the code, just like any other type of enforcement, we can either proceed through the municipal court system with a violation, or we can proceed to abate the sign. And I would tell you, usually my preference as the prosecutor, person responsible for overseeing the prosecution, is going to be to proceed in municipal court, where I can have the judge simply issue an order saying you must comply with the code. But there are times when occasionally I've had to have a sign abated. We've had signs, not in this city, but in other cities, where the sign was a danger because it was blocking view quarters. Well, if it's blocking a view quarter and creating a hazard that makes the roadways not unsafe, then that's a problem. We're not going to necessarily worry about the municipal court. We're going to deal with abating the sign.
Okay. And my third question, I think this might be for the city manager, but the section where it talks about the signs may be located in the public right-of-way subject to the following, and there's a series of conditions. While I recognize this is perspective in nature, the question that I have is for the signs that we have as a city downtown, like our directional signs, whether or not we are falling within, if that's been looked at, if we fall within these regulations. And while I understand this is perspective in nature, I would like us to just see where we stand in complying with this.
Councilmember Elrod, I think I'd like to try to address that.
You want to take it? Go for
yes.
it.
The wayfaring directional signs that we have placed on city property or in the public right-of-way are permitted as a matter of right. Now, again, if they're on private property, then that would be a different question, because that would now constitute a sign. But the wayfaring signs that are on public property are there as a matter of right. And banners may be placed by the city on city property or in the public right-of-way for city events. In answer to Councilmember Valdee's question about banners placed on poles on Main Street, those do get a special sign permit through issued by the communications director as she reviews the matter for other permits.
And so while I understand that we have a right because it's a public right-of-way, there's just some specifics about if we have 6 feet of if they're ADA, if they're getting in away from ADA compliant, or if there's 6 feet of right-of-way, et cetera. So that's all I just want to ensure that we are compliant, and if we're not, I would just like to know what position we may decide to take on that.
If I may, Mayor,
Yes.
just respond to that quickly. Actually, specifically to those wayfinding signs, I do have a walkthrough scheduled with Public Works staff on Main Street to kind of look at a series of issues, and we certainly can kind of raise that. ADA is probably the preemptive regulation that we have to adhere to for any infrastructure on a sidewalk. So we may have a right to put certain things in certain places, but we still must comply with ADA. So, but I'd be more than happy to kind of make sure that those wayfinding signs are kind of part of the analysis.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Valdez.
So, thank you. Thanks for answering my questions that I sent to you earlier. But the more you talk, the more I think of more questions.
Oh, no.
Short answers are. So what is it, in paragraph 1017-6-2, it's paragraph E, where it talks about the subdivision entrance signs. It says one permanent subdivision entrance sign shall be allowed. What if there's more than one entrance and they all have signs? And also a part of that too is, what is the difference between a subdivision entrance and also a single family residential?
In this case, the subdivision entrance signs, these would be the major entrance signs into a subdivision. Taking, for example, Littleton Village has a major entrance into that subdivision. That would be the permanent entrance sign that would fall under this code. Now, if you... and so they are limited to that restrictions in the code. Now, there could be other signs that could be directional signs that could be permitted, but they would not be, they'd be smaller and they would not be the same as the subdivision entrance sign. And that would be how they would be treated.
And I'm thinking of neighborhoods like Aberdeen Village and even South Bridge, South Park, where they have multiple entrances and they may have more than one sign or a monument sign, not huge, but monument signs nonetheless. So does each one now has to be limited?
The others would have to meet the criteria for directional signs, which would mean as part of the sign package, if they were illuminated, they would have to be part of the sign package and permitted. Now, if they were non-illuminated, directional signs into the subdivision that are not illuminated are not required to be permitted. So it's going to really come down to, are they illuminated? A lot of the directional signs in the subdivisions, some of them are very illuminated. I'm thinking of a couple I drove down Bowes this afternoon, and they have lights and everything to shine on the sign. I've seen other subdivision signs on Bowes, not illuminated at all. And that would be the criteria, would be the illumination would make them a directional sign subject to the sign.
So on that, whether it's a family residential or single-family residential or subdivision, if the monument signs are just stone, not lit, and, you know, not huge or anything like that, so, and there's multiple, where does it say in here that that is allowed? Where it says non, I didn't see the non-illumination.
How you would have to look at, look at 17-6-2, which talks about subdivision entrance signs.
Yes.
That is referencing the one. The other is directional signs, and that's in 10-17-6-1, and it talks about non-illuminated directional signs, and there's a size criteria for those, and that they are permitted without a permit if they are not illuminated. However, if such signs are illuminated, then they are subject to regulation under this code. So non-illuminated, they don't require a permit. Illuminated, they do require a permit and would be part of the sign package.
So if it just says the sign, the non-illuminated sign, just says Apex neighborhood, not a directional sign, but they have, let's say, 5 or 6 of those going into that neighborhood.
And a directional sign, that would still qualify. A directional sign is a sign that directs the movement or placement of pedestrians or vehicular traffic on a lot. So that would, I would interpret that if you had multiple signs that indicated your subdivision entrance that were not illuminated, they would not require a permit. But if you have them illuminated, then you are going to have a permit.
Right, thank you very much.
Any other questions?
So,
Councilmember Cole.
a sneaky question. So somebody has an illuminated sign now that is not going to be allowed. Can they just turn it off?
Councilmember Cole, members of the council, no. That would be a non-conforming sign, and they would be able to continue using it because it was legal at the time they installed it, even though now it would require a permit.
Is there, since part of what we're trying to do, I think, is cultivate a certain character of our city. Is there, and this is not necessarily to put in this, but are we considering possibly doing something to encourage, support their bringing their sign into the current compliance?
Councilmember Cole, members of the council, I think, yes, I think this is one of the steps that we over time are going to take on signs to cultivate the vision that you're going to develop through the vision and comp plan process. Right now, what I would describe this as, this is designed to make the code more workable for applicants, make it more clear, and provide some restrictions in areas that we haven't. My expectation is as you go through this visioning process, you're going to have a lot of other thoughts about signs that you're going to want incorporated in here. This isn't designed to do that. This is really designed to fix the problems we currently have. So basically, step 2 will be your vision process. That vision is also going to, down the road, get incorporated in this code.
Well, I think what you just said contradicts something you said. If this is designed to fix problems we currently have, then people who have non-conforming don't have to fix them?
Councilmember Cole, yes, I mean, the difficulty with dealing with non-conforming is particularly in signs. Because signs are protected commercial speech, we can establish what the law calls reasonable time, place, and manner, which is a really fancy term for we can put regulations on speech that are reasonable. But what the courts have also said is you can't go back and suddenly punish people for speech that was legal before.
Yeah,
because,
no, I mean, you've told me that, but what you said 2 minutes ago didn't conform with what you said 2.5 minutes ago.
Well, then I'm sorry for that. I am not communicating as well as I should. Basically, yes, non-conforming signs, we have to leave non-conforming because of the free speech issues. But this is going to correct a lot of problems that we currently have in the day-to-day administration of signs for the future. And it's going to sort of establish a better foundation that as you establish your vision for this community, that you can graft that vision onto how we treat signs.
Okay, so just as an aside to the city manager, maybe we might think of ways as incentives to encourage people to replace signs, to change signs, whatever. If this is for the benefit, which I'm understanding, for the benefit of the community, the image, the neighbors, whatever, if they are currently not great signs, and by this they'd be they'd be bad signs, that we might get them to become good signs by giving some incentive.
And Councilmember Cole, I've actually been involved in cases where we've done like plan development zonings, where we've rezoned a property, and part of that, and the customized sign package was, we had people get rid of really ugly signs, and we offered to, okay, you get rid of 2 ugly, and you can have 1 nice, and we actually used rezoning to get rid of some really ugly signs. And so certainly, if those opportunities come up, I'm happy to work with your staff to see what we can accomplish about getting rid of less than desirable signs.
Any other questions, Council? Councilmember Schlachter.
I want to follow up. You said, if I'm correct here, that after 7 years, the non-conforming signs won't be allowed to be non-conforming?
Yes. They would lose their non-conforming status, and we could, at that point, we could address those. Now, what tends to happen, I would tell you, is most sign companies will then come in with a permit, or they'll make some improvements to meet the minimum requirements of the code, because usually they have enough money invested in these that they're going to at some point meet the requirements of the code. I have very rarely had sign companies that have just said, I'm non-conforming, I'm going to stay non-conforming, I'm going to dare the city to tear it down. It just generally doesn't happen.
Thank you.
Councilmember Elrod.
I have a little bit of a procedure question. I'm going to call council's attention and the attorney to section 10-17-6-1, item C and the item F. So I'm going to try to be an English teacher like Peggy and Carol. Are you an English teacher? Wow. I should not try to do this. Okay, so.
You'll be sorry.
I know.
What page are you talking?
9.
9? Okay.
9.
Thank you.
9. Yes.
Okay, so all I'm trying to do is put language where it needs to be. So in item C, where you go on to define what illuminated means, we actually have illuminated as one of the definitions. So I think it's redundant to add it here as well. So it just makes it a little bit more cumbersome and may pose a risk of, we define illuminated one way in the definition and then we extrapolate on it here. So my suggestion would be to strike the illuminated means blah, 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 blah from this section because we have it defined in the previous section.
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, certainly you can do that. The reason that that language was added above and beyond the definition is that we occasionally will have folks who will say, well, I want to install all the illumination for my sign, but I'll turn it off. And since I'll turn it off, I'm not a sign that requires a permit. And the answer here was that was added. I talked with the Community Development Department about that. My recommendation was to add that only for that reason, because we do have people who want to argue that, well, yes, I have all the power, everything's there, the lights are there, but I never switch it on, so it's a directional sign that's not subject to the code. And that's why we added beyond the definition.
Okay. Okay. The other one is section F. Give me 1 second. Okay, so section F, we talk about signs and display windows, and we define what signs and display windows are. They're temporary, they're meant to incorporate merchandise or a display relating to the services or products offered. And then we start with, however, signs inside of display windows visible from the street that are designed to advertise business compared to merchandise or displays are not covered by this exception. So this one, again, for clarity's sake, because we say what's allowed and then we also say what's not allowed, I would like to move that second section, remove the word however, and just start with signs inside display windows visible from the street under the signs prohibited. So it's very clear that they are prohibited.
Mayor, Council, I think that certainly works. My suggestion would be that if the council was agreeable with that last piece be made subsection F under 10-17-6-2. We have already subsections A through E, and we would just simply move that language over to subsection F. And I am happy if the council does make that amendment to work with the city clerk to accomplish that.
So do I need to make it as an amendment?
No.
Point of
After
order.
you have the motion,
Do you need a motion? We typically,
Okay.
if there is general consensus, it's a non-substantive, essentially a non-substantive edit. Unless there's an objection to this, it's a simple direction to staff to make sure that it's done in the final ordinance. Is there any objection to Karina's suggestion?
Nope.
Okay. Staff? Good? Anything else?
And I am going to propose an amendment in that particular language.
Don't have a motion yet.
Oh, sorry, then I'll wait.
Yeah, we haven't had a public hearing yet.
Oh.
Mayor, council, I'd be happy to answer any other questions before the public hearing.
Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing, so I will open it at 8:04. We have two people signed up to speak. The first is Tim Levier.
Greetings, Council. Tim Levier, District 3. I stand here tonight opposed. I do like the ordinance in general, but there are a few items that I find problematic, or in my bugs might be your features. We'll see if there's any consensus on this later, but one, there's a little bit of history with commercial mascots in the fact that prior to the last revision, which was about 18 months ago, commercial mascots didn't exist, and people twirling signs or wearing a costume were considered a third-party sign under the building code. Well, I don't understand why a person is being subjected to building codes, and that's one of the nice fixes that this ordinance takes, is moving this to the zoning. So 18 months ago, we created this commercial mascot definition, but we didn't outlaw commercial mascots. So for the last 18 months, people have been able to run roughshod all over town, wearing costumes and twirling signs, but they haven't. So I don't really see why we're going to go from not regulating commercial mascots over the last 18 months to fully banning all commercial mascots in any zoning district. I think that's a drastic step. I don't think people have been abusing this freedom of speech that they've been empowered to utilize the last 18 months. So I'd like to see that struck. That's 10-17-6 to A1, where that is added. Second is with flags. Currently, today, any business can fly a flag. If the Avalanche make the playoffs, they can fly an Avalanche flag outside their bar. That won't be permitted under that same section B, subsection C. Flags that are not the flag of the United States, any foreign nation, any state or political subdivision of the United States or political subdivision of the state, or flag of a political entity. If it's not one of those, it's not permitted. So the Avalanche, if you support law enforcement and you have a thin blue line American flag, you can't fly that. If you like gay rights and you want to have a rainbow flag, you can't fly that. I think that's restrictive, unnecessary, burdensome to our businesses, and I don't think that's fair. The last item I do agree with Councilmember Valdez's assessment on the entrance signs. I think if you made an amendment saying that one sign per entrance was allowed, I think that would resolve a lot of the issues. South Park has very different locations for their entrances, at the top of the hill and at Jackass Hill. Having one per, that would be good. Same with Southbridge, where you're on Broadway and you're on Mineral.
Thank you. Next is Pam Chadbourne.
My name is Pam Chapman. I live a block and a half from here. So this is an interesting ordinance. I have a personal issue about murals, and I want to thank the city manager for helping me out last year with this, and former council member Hopping. So a painting was started on the wall of the Essex House Motel, which is on Crestline and Santa Fe, and arguably this is a gateway to downtown Littleton. I know that some people say there's only 2 or something like that, but really there's 7 ways to get into downtown, and really it's to the benefit of the city to consider all of them, and it's on Santa Fe. So very visible from people driving by. Thanks to City Manager Mark Rolfe and to Councilmember Hopping for intervening in this. The issue was that my understanding is an artist approached the owner of the motel to paint the back of the motel to promote himself, to promote his work. And I'm wondering whether that's covered in this kind of case. He's promoting his artist service, not a product. Maybe that is a product, I don't know, and that's my question. It was a balloon dog. So the Essex House is a couple stories, and it was as long as the Essex House. And I feel that that has issues being in downtown Littleton. We have a historic district. This is part of it. We have downtown design standards and guidelines. And this is when they were painting over it. Again, the city manager approached the owner and said, is this what we want to do? And, you know, I wrote email and said, look, let's avoid First Amendment stuff. Let's just talk about whether this fits this site. So I went to the Fine Arts Board and suggested to them that they work proactively with private owners of potential public art site. Perhaps we should create a vision for murals in Littleton and talk to these owners and maybe have a plan for murals and stuff like that. So let me just end there because I only have 15 seconds. The other thing that occurred is on a utility box, this was painted over because a few people objected to the fact that there were certain flags on this. It was replaced by the guy who proposed the city flag. That never should have been done. This should have been left up for First Amendment, and that's a good thing to protect.
Thank you, Pam. There's nobody else signed up. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Seeing no one, we close the public hearing at 8:11. Oops. All right, council, let's get a motion on the table so that we can have discussion. Prior to that, let me ask if there are any questions based on public comment that we'd like to ask the city attorney. City attorney, would you mind coming back down?
Absolutely.
Questions based on public comment, council? Councilmember Valdez?
Yes, regarding murals and the one that she had mentioned, but there's also other murals throughout the city, and I'm thinking of a coffee shop that has a mural. This does not ban murals.
Absolutely, it does not. Murals that are designed, in fact, the definition, right now, we don't have a definition in the sign code for murals. This creates a definition, piece of artwork painted or applied directly that is characteristic of mural painting and incorporates architectural elements of the given space would be a mural. A mural, for example, might be on the back of a building celebrating the pioneers who founded Littleton, or celebrating any number of historical or cultural events. The concern is, what do you do when you have a mural that advertises ABC recreational marijuana store in Englewood? Or what do you do if you have a mural that advertises some other retail use? That's really not a mural. It's really a billboard. It just happens to be painted on the back of a building. Mm-hmm. And what this is designed to do is, if it's a billboard painted on the back of a building, we're going to treat it like a sign. We're going to treat it like a billboard. If it's art, like there was a picture of a number of flags, that I've seen murals very much like that. That would be a mural. That would be defined as a mural under this ordinance, and not a commercial type painting.
So a butterfly would be acceptable, but if the business is called Butterflies, is that a sign or a mural?
If it's designed to, if it's designed to advertise a commercial product, as the definition says, if it's designed to communicate information about a product, service, or event, then it's a sign. If it's just to communicate a historical event, a cultural event, recognize some artistic event, then that would be a mural exempt from this code. So the idea is art is exempt, commercial signs are signs.
Thank you.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Rinky's comes to mind. Did they have to come and get a permit to do their mural on their alleyway there?
In terms of, right now, no, Mr. Renke, they would not have to get a permit because there's no requirement in the code for any murals to be treated as a sign. There's no definition. We have no definition.
And then regarding flags, I remember us talking specifically about flags and commercial mascots in the study session.
Yes.
And I think we came to a consensus, and I got to apologize.
Let me address
I
that.
glazed over that knot and thinking we pretty much agreed that flags were acceptable. I think you brought up the some offensive flags that would not be. But sports flags I thought were acceptable, and I also thought commercial mascots, but I must have missed that.
Councilmember Driscoll, members of the council. First, on commercial mascot, that's existing language from the code. We did not change that. There's been no alterations to that. On flags, what we did was we dealt with flags in two ways. There are some flags that are exempt from regulation altogether. Flags of the United States, foreign nations, states or political subdivisions of the state, political entities, or having historical cultural significance. Those are all exempt. Other flags are allowed. They just require a special permit. Some of the classics where we want the special permit, and again, certainly Jocelyn could talk in great detail about this. We have auto dealers. Ford loves to have a huge Ford flag. That's a sign, and they can have it. They just need to incorporate it in their sign package. If you have, we don't regulate flags in people's yards. Those are protected by the First Amendment. And so if you have a Broncos flag in your yard and you're going to fly it when they win the Super Bowl, maybe a while, but just kidding, but you can do that. If you, on the other hand, want to have a 50 by 80 Broncos flag to direct people to your car dealership, that's a sign. And you can have it, but you have to incorporate it in your sign package. And there's no prohibition, again, the rainbow flag, if you want to have a rainbow flag in your front window, perfectly free to do that. That's protected by the First Amendment. If you want to have a giant rainbow flag because you want to celebrate Pride Month in June, again, you need to incorporate that in your sign package. You can absolutely have it. It's just part of your sign package.
So if somebody were to fly the avalanche flag for a day or a week or whatever, are they going to get their hands slapped?
The Halloween flag, basically, we would treat it as something that's required by special permit. Honestly, if somebody has a flag and it's up in violation for a day or two, what we're going to just do is remind them of the special permit requirement. Again, this is code enforcement. We're compliance focused. The idea isn't that we're going to go down and yanking flags off of poles. We're just going to remind people, by the way, this does require a special permit. Please make sure in the future you have a special permit. And the idea there is again, making sure that if it looks like a sign, it needs to be treated like a sign. And but there's no prohibition about flags. It's just some flags are going to constitute something that has to be incorporated into your sign package.
Other questions? Councilmember Cole.
I'm trying to digest what you just said. So I'm looking, half a second, I'm reading what it says here about flag.
I just wanted to make a quick comment on that. In the verbiage on the flag, it does say one of the allowed uses is cultural. So that would, I think, cover the sports flags or those types of things. So by having that verbiage in there, that does make that allowable.
Mayor, members of the council, yes. In fact, that came out of the Planning Commission. One of the things the Planning Commission was very concerned about was that they not allow flags that really look like advertising, and the discussion was ultimately that cultural significance, sports are part of our culture. Because this is protected First Amendment speech, I would tell you there's a law enforcement flag that instead of having white stripes, all the stripes are blue to recognize law enforcement. That has cultural significance. As a lawyer, I would say that's culturally significant. Rainbow flag, culturally significant. And anything that we're going to err on the side of the First Amendment and what is culturally significant.
Would you, since I'm not seeing it, where is the flag piece in here?
It's on page 10, subsection B. We have a provision that says signs allowed by special permit. And C is designed to deal with the flags that are not accepted.
So I have an issue with that. That also excludes, there are some people that actually have a family coat of arms flag. I don't know if anybody in Littleton actually has one now, but there are people that do. And I'm having difficulty if somebody loves some athletic team, not being able to put that out on their property.
On the residents, they would be. The United States Supreme Court has said that you have an absolute right, as a matter of free speech, to hang flags. So if you want to hang a flag from your front window for the Oakland Raiders, might not be terribly popular in this place.
What Raiders?
But
there's no such team as Oakland Raiders.
you are free to do so. The Constitution protects that. You want to hang a law enforcement flag from your front window, you're free to do that. You cannot regulate that. Now, if you're a business and you want to have a 50 by 80 foot flag of the owner's coat of arms hanging in front of the business, that's a sign. And you can still do it, but you just have to incorporate it in your sign package. And the idea there is, again, if it's a sign, it should be part of your sign package that we consider as part of the zoning case.
Oh, so I probably just missed something you said. So somebody could fly the Broncos flag and every other sports flag if they wanted, if they had it as part of their package?
In a business, yes, they could incorporate a flagpole that would fly the Denver Broncos or the Colorado Rapids or any of the flags. You could fly those, just incorporate it in your sign package, and it's perfectly good.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. It seems to me a little over the top. In my mind, it'd be more, it's an aesthetic thing, possibly, but we don't deal with aesthetics really in the sign code, right?
Well,
I mean, you have to have your sign in good repair, but
I would suggest to you, Councilmember Cole, members of the council, that in a way you do deal with aesthetics, because a huge overpowering sign or flag can become disruptive to the neighborhoods. There's a well-known gas station that has them.
How about a nice discreet one? I mean, so there's one thing if it's huge and overpowering. It's another if it's just a nice discreet one. Will we also, with this, not let somebody have someone out waving on their business property, waving some athletic flag on certain days?
Councilmember Cole, the current code does prohibit individuals from advertising, like sign twirlers, advertising commercial products on the right-of-way. So I guess the question would be, if you're just walking up and down the right-of-way waving the Denver Broncos flag, that's really protected First Amendment speech. If you're walking up and down the right-of-way with the Denver's flag in one hand and you're advertising Coors beer in the other, now we're really advertising a commercial product.
But if you're walking up and down the parking lot of a restaurant or whatever, waving the Broncos flag on game day?
In terms of private property, the restaurant, that really isn't for us a sign issue. That's really a trespass issue with the restaurant. If the restaurant doesn't
So
like...
I mean, if the restaurant is paying somebody to do that.
If they want to pay somebody to do that on their property, and they're just waving a sign, the question for us is going to be, is it a sign twirler? I don't think it falls within the definition of our code for a sign twirler, and reading the way our definition currently is, and so that would be permitted.
Okay, but if they had a permanent fixture on their property that was the flag of a given or several sports teams.
They would have to incorporate that in their sign package.
So as long as they incorporate it in that sign package, we're okay.
Yes, I mean, because what we want to do is we want to look at things like illumination, we want to look at size, we want to look at placement. I've seen sign cases where we've had sign poles put right next to a fire hydrant. Go figure. And those are the types of things we want to look at.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councilmember Elrod?
I want to go back to section 10-17-6-2, the commercial mascot and/or rotating sign. So the addition to section number 1 of commercial mascot and/or rotating sign. And I looked through the definitions. We have a definition for commercial mascot that has been in place. And I guess what I'm trying to understand, because I had asked this question as well, Steve, we talked about this, whether we were imposing an additional regulation. And in this particular case, what you stated to me was that we were not. And I believe the reason is rotating, while it said rotating signs in our current code, the intent
code
was...
says rotating signs. It doesn't say commercial mascot, and it was kind of really difficult because we were really trying to draw very, very fine straws. What's a rotating sign versus a commercial mascot sign? And we were treating them all the same, but in terms of prohibited, it wasn't clear that a commercial mascot sign was prohibited, even though we treated them as prohibited under the code. And so this really was to resolve sort of this drawing of extremely fine straws in the definition.
So how did you said we treated them as prohibited because we were, essentially the term rotating signs incorporated commercial mascots and things like that? Was that the initial intent of the code?
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council, I think the background on this is that most of the rotating signs were just not somebody standing there. They were somebody standing there carrying something that advertised a business. So we treated it as a rotating sign. Now, the one issue that we do get into on occasion is what do you do with a totally commercial mascot that is not carrying anything, and they're just simply a commercial mascot. And right now, our code, the only definition is that it defines commercial mascot to include all of these other types of signs, and yet we didn't really have a prohibition. Our prohibition was against rotating signs. So we were treating commercial mascots as prohibited, but we didn't really say, we just said rotating signs, and we just lumped everything into that current language. But we were treating them all as prohibited for purposes of the code. And even though we just dumped them in to the language in 10-7-6-2 and just treated them as the rotating under that prohibition.
So we're just creating clarification of what the original intent
That's correct.
was.
That is totally correct.
Any other questions? Councilmember Cole?
Yeah, so, mascot. It's not commercial, but sometimes people have mascots for elections, campaign mascots. They walk through a community, whatever. I know you're not including that in here, but it seems to me if we exclude commercial mascots, we're going to have to exclude election mascots.
Councilmember Cole, members of the council, political mascots, for example, one party well-known uses an elephant and another party well-known uses a donkey.
But there are also some independent folks.
Yes.
But if you're running for a particular party and you go door to door dressed in the costume, number one, you probably aren't going to get anybody to answer the door, but apart from that.
That is not, that's going to be protected under the First Amendment. So if you want to run for office and knock on the public stores as an elephant or a donkey, you are going to be protected under the First Amendment.
All right, are there any additional questions?
So I'm not liking this particular piece. I'm not seeing that there's this kind of negative impact on the community having a commercial mascot.
And I mean, certainly council could take out the whole provision on rotating signs and make those legal. What we did here was trying to simply make sure that our enforcement matched how we interpreted the code. Now, I would tell you my concern if you start taking out rotating signs.
No, I'm talking the mascot.
Well, if we take out the mascot, we could certainly do that. But then we would want to go back and readjust the rotating signs definition to exclude it from there. And if that's something that council would like us to look at, what I'd like to do is recommend to you that let Jocelyn and I spend some time with that, because on signs, as the lawyer, I know how to enforce the code really well. I have to tell you, I'm not the one who takes the applications, and my guess is I'd want to spend some time with Jocelyn and her staff to make sure we don't have unintended consequences.
So, City Attorney, if a council member were to make a motion to remove that from the ordinance at this point, we could remove it and have staff redesign it, bring it back, and make an amendment to this at a later date.
We could certainly do that as well, Mayor.
That's the cleanest version. Cleanest. Okay. Any other questions? Council,
I'm sorry, I do. One more clarification. This was a question that I asked as well, Steve. I just want to make sure we talk about it here as well. And it comes back to this rotating sign or mascot, et cetera. We have, you may have a school holding up a sign saying car wash, commercial car wash, or not a commercial car wash, but they're doing a car wash. You would have, different instances of people holding signs on the right of way. Some will be for commercial and some for other purposes. Help me, or please explain how they're different or the same.
Councilmember Elrod, members of the council. First, the folks holding up signs will work for food. The courts have held those are constitutionally protected, and we cannot prohibit those. Now, we can deal with them from a public safety standpoint. For example, some of our medians, if you look at parts of bowls is a good example. The median is so narrow that it's a safety issue, and there we could prohibit it. On the other hand, one of the problems when we build really nice roads with wide medians, the medians then become public forums. So, but we can address that. The other one, which is like the car washers. The high school car washers are not selling a commercial product. They are simply advertising a charitable activity, and they would not fall under the rotating signs definition in our code. So we would not require them, for example, to go get a sign permit. They would just be simply exempted from our code because they're not a commercial activity.
And so the only one that's prohibited here is a business standing on a corner with a sign, whether it's twirling or not, saying pizza $2 a slice. So that would not be allowed.
One of the tax firms has a person dressed up as a character twirling a sign. That would be prohibited, but not the high school car wash and not the...
I'm purposefully saying a commercial business just standing there, not twirling, not wearing anything. They're just holding up a sign, come in, Pizza Friday, $2. They would not be allowed to do that.
We would treat that as a rotating sign, and we would... at this point, based on your current code, that would be...
Not allowed. It would not be allowed.
It would not be allowed under your current code.
Okay. And is that true even if they're on their own property?
Now, even if
Councilmember Cole, go ahead, ask your question now, please.
So if they're standing on their property, which happens to be on a corner, can they do that?
Councilmember Cole, members of the council, now if they are just holding a sign up on their own property, again, if it would be covered under, it's currently covered under our code. It could either be, depending on the nature of the sign, it could either be a temporary sign or it could be a rotating sign. And currently, under your code, that is regulated. And it would either require, if it's a temporary sign, because they're not doing it all the time, they could get a temporary sign permit. If it's a rotating sign, it's currently prohibited under the code as is.
Council, any more questions?
I'd like to call the question and make a motion.
Let's get a motion on the table.
Okay. I move to approve the ordinance deleting Title IV, Section 3 from the building regulations of the municipal code regarding sign codes regulating and adding Title 10, Section 17 to the zoning code of the municipal code regarding sign code regulation.
Second. We have a motion and a second by Councilmember Fay. Discussion.
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Driscoll.
We can, I would like to see us eliminate, there's obviously some concerns around the mascot and the rotating signs.
Make a motion.
Do you want to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
Motion to amend.
I'd like to make a motion that we take out section 10-17-6-2, paragraph A, 1, eliminating commercial mascot and/or rotating signs for further discussion.
Need a second?
Second.
Councilmember Cole seconded. We have a motion to remove section 10-17-6-2, section A1 for further discussion at a date to be determined. Council, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Schlechter.
I would like to see that reworked to see as permitted sign options for the commercial mascots. As far as the electronic rotating signs, I think I would like to see those stay as prohibited, but I think we can have that come back as a future suggestion from staff.
Other discussion? Councilmember Fay.
By electronic, did you mean electric? Or, well, I would, never mind what you said. I would like to keep prohibition of electrical signs that continually rotate. Or signs that are, signs that continually rotate.
So at this
Never
point,
mind the electrical.
We're making suggestions to staff as to what we'd like to see returned. Councilmember Elrod.
So the additional language that was that, this is a clarification on the amendment, Pat, and what your intent was. The additional language that was added was the commercial mascot and/or. The rotating sign was already in our code. So I just want clarification if your amendment is to strike the new language or strike the whole, was your intent to strike the whole?
I did not say anything about rotating sign. I can't think of a rotating sign in Littleton, but mine was to strictly strike A1.
Takes that rotating sign.
So right now.
You're
right,
okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking electrical or electronic rotating sign. No.
So I just want clarification of what your intent on the amendment was, to just strike the
that.
new language that was added?
Strike that whole.
Strikes.
That's what we got.
The A1, which states commercial mascot and/or rotating signs.
Even though rotating signs was already in our code?
Correct.
Councilmember Fay.
Seconded that. Did anybody second that?
Councilmember Fay.
Not the amendment.
No, she didn't.
I did not.
We didn't have a second on that.
We did.
Cole,
Yeah.
Councilmember Cole.
Yeah,
Cole.
Cole
did.
Yeah, Councilmember Cole.
Thank you.
Yeah, you, Peggy, second?
You second.
Okay, Councilmember Fay.
Question, does this mean that then we're proposing allowing commercial mascots?
What this means is that we will take up this particular section again. In order to pass the sign code, this seems to be a snagging place. So by removing it, it will go under separate discussion, and we can amend the sign code to bring it back when it's in a place where we all feel better.
But my question is, does this remove prohibition of commercial mascots?
It does.
So that means they can be anywhere doing anything at any time?
There would be no regulation at this point in time. If this amendment is passed and the ordinance is passed as amended, it would remove it.
Would this be the right time? If I want to propose an amendment, I have to wait until we vote on this one, correct?
Yeah, we need to vote. We have an amendment on the floor.
Okay.
I would like to ask Mr. Driscoll why, can I do that? Why we would want commercial mascots on our streets and our right-of-ways where they would interfere with traffic.
I don't disagree. We don't want them. I'm just saying I think we need to rework the verbiage and get better clarification on it.
It seems that what we have on the floor, though, is to remove it entirely.
Remove it temporarily for an amendment.
The entire amendment states to remove that section for further discussion at a date to be determined. So the amendment moves it back to a conversation for council again.
May I ask, for the sake of not creating another amendment, instead of a date certain, can we make it for our next study session? Can we set a date to it? So we address it right away?
That's fine.
Pat, are you fine with that?
Sure. It belongs to the body unless the body has a problem with it. Just
That's fine.
we'll put it at the next study session. Okay.
And for doing that, just so somebody keeps track of it, because I'll probably forget it, because Corinne, I think you just mentioned commercial mascots in the right-of-way, which is a separate issue, I think, from there being someplace, but not in a right-of-way.
Okay, council, this will be the conversation that we have at the next study session. We're not going to solve this one tonight. Okay, so we have a motion, we have an amendment and a second on the floor. Are you ready to vote? Mm-hmm. Does everybody understand the amendment?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilmember Fay voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
Okay, we're back to our original motion as amended. Is there any more discussion?
No.
Okay, are you ready to vote on the original motion?
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
All right. That didn't take long.
Not at all.
It's always the easy ones, Kyle. I told you. All right, we are now to our comments and reports. City Manager, any report?
Yes, Mayor, just briefly. Now that the City Council has passed the inclusion ordinance here, there will be a series of actions that will take place over the next several months. And so my intent is to update the City Council at study sessions when appropriate here, probably fairly frequently, about kind of the status of that work. There are a series of agreements, some of which will not necessarily need council approval, but some will, transfer of assets. And so I think my intent, and certainly that of the rest of the staff, city attorney, is to provide those updates on a regular basis here publicly. I think, too, there's also some details that I think we've all kind of heard from the public and certainly talked about, the council did. And staff's trying to address a lot of those in more detailed discussions here with South Metro. Performance standards is probably one example. We're going to try to work with South Metro to see what we can do to add some clarification to that. So we do have some work here that we're certainly beyond the inclusion agreement here, but a lot of details that we're going to have to work out between now and then. And so again, my intent is to try to brief the council and the public on a regular basis. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you. Okay, council reports. We'll start with Councilmember Cole.
I don't think I have anything that I need to take time for.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Driscoll.
Yes, I wanted the people watching on television to know that the parking issue is alive and well in downtown Littleton. Myself and city manager and mayor will be discussing that on Friday, and then we'll be taking that to a study session a little later in May. I advise anybody that has an issue with parking in downtown Littleton to show up for that study session and listen in.
Go.
Councilmember Valdez.
Pass.
Councilmember Schlichter.
Yeah, three things. First, last week I attended the Jefferson County Urban Agriculture Day at Five Fridges Farm in Wheat Ridge. I saw you had registered, but apparently couldn't make it. It was a presentation on policy and regulations from other municipalities and Jeffco to promote kind of small-scale agriculture. It was a great tour of the farm and presentations by various people from Jeffco Public Health. I would look forward to presenting the information that I received to staff and the rest of council to work towards a policy here in Littleton on agriculture. Maybe not big agriculture, but in your backyards, things like that, as we move forward with our vision and comprehensive plan. I think that would be an important aspect to that we really haven't thought about that. Second, I attended the first anniversary party event at Neveria Juarez over on Littleton Boulevard, little ice cream shop, a Mexican ice cream shop. It was great. Had luchadores, had Mexican wrestling in the parking lot there, had a bounce castle, so I think it was great to see the community there. I saw Officer Bernard from Littleton Police Department hanging out with the kids. I had a great interaction with them, so I want to thank him for showing up for that. And finally, May 9th is the next series of the Wonder Wednesday at the Littleton Museum. The topic is, what is a mandala? And it's from 12 to 1 over at the museum.
So, Councilmember Fay.
Going all the way back to public comment, I look forward to working with staff on the suggestion from the citizen that we get landscaping to go along with that ordinance. And I wanted to note that there are 7,000 blooming crabapple trees in Littleton right now, which did not happen by accident. So thanks to all the people over the years who made that happen, and the rest of us, be sure to notice them. They're everywhere. It's great.
Councilmember Elrod.
I stopped by the city center on Saturday and dropped off some drugs for Drug Take Back Day.
Not doing drugs anymore?
No, not those. So some really interesting information that was shared. So one, thank you to the volunteers that were there and the police officers as well. They collect about 400 pounds a year. So that's, just good for safety purposes, good for environmentally, so they don't get, go down the drains, et cetera. So the other message that I wanted to give to the public was if you missed that day, there's actually a bin inside City Center that you can do that any time of the year. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that there is a way to still dispose of some of those items if you miss that drug take-back day. I also received an invitation for all of council to visit with and get to know the Right Step program. It's a therapeutic equestrian ranch that we have right at the corner of Mineral and Santa Fe. Essentially, it's kind of tucked back there. They're having their annual fundraiser on May 19th. So if anyone's interested, I'm happy to I'll just pass along the invitation. And then I attended the Town Hall Arts Center, essentially their kickoff for next season. That's going on this week. You guys all got the invitation as well. I was there last night. The season looks fantastic. So just encourage people to frequent the theater there, and they are offering season passes now. A lot of great, it was packed. It was packed. It was really good to see. Yeah.
Okay, I have no report, so we are adjourned.
Yeah.